What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stucky.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
college football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
Whether you're into college football,
college basketball,
college baseball, or any of the college sports,
we are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there.
Omari, thanks so much for joining me, man. I really appreciate it. So I wanted to start by kind of asking like a very upfront and direct question, which is like, what do the Pistons want here? Because I've been kind of like digging around the last couple of weeks about asking some of these teams at the bottom of the conferences, like, okay, hey, you know, do they want to win? Do you want to win, or are you just like, well, you know, winning might be nice, like, oh, we always want to win, you know, those kind of things. Or if it's like, no, and sometimes the answers, especially for media members, like, no, they very much do not want to win. Yeah. Like, this is let us lag for flag. Let us get out of here as much as possible in order to get those picks, because it's not just flag. There's Harper at the top. There's Ace Bailey. There's a bunch of really good guys at the top of this draft. So I'm going to give you some options. So do the Pistons want to A, win no matter what, B, try and win until it's clear they won't make the playoffs and then tank, C, try and win until January, which is what a lot of teams do, which is like, yeah, we'll give it the old college try and then we'll pull the plug to get a head start on tanking, or D, just outright trying to get into the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. Let's get a franchise guy to go along with Cade. Of those options, where are the Detroit Pistons at?
I would say probably closest to B. This is a team, they've won the fewest amount of games in the last 5 years of any NBA team. And then with that, of course, 14 wins last season. That's the worst record in franchise history, worst record in the NBA. The season prior, 17 wins, third worst record in franchise history. And they want to see this thing move forward. You've been building, essentially since they hired Trey Weaver back in 2020. And of course, he's going now. You have Trajan Langdon who came in. You have a new head coach in JB Bickerstaff, and you just paid Cade. He got the max rookie extension this summer, and it's time to see this thing move forward. I would assume that they would compete until, like you mentioned, they will eventually look at the Cooper Flag sweepstakes and then decide, okay, do we need to keep trying to compete when we're out of it, or do we get in position for a top 5 pick, which essentially is what they've done the last 4 years. But I would say, especially coming off of last season, you have to see that needle move forward to an extent. So they're going to try to win. They're going to try to build. They're going to try to organize around Cade and get a competitive team on the floor. You look at what they did this offseason to get more veterans and more shooting. And that's their priority. I don't think they're expecting to make the playoffs. I don't think they're going to have a mandate or anything along those lines. But you have to see this team move forward. I think they're done with what happened last season. You got to start cracking 20, 30 wins at some point, especially with Cade being paid now. So that's where they are.
Yeah, I think it's everything to me says like they want to try and win, right? Like, you don't pay Tobias and you don't bring on Malik if you're not trying to win. You don't, especially to me, you don't eat the contract of Monty Williams if you're not trying to win. Like that, the coaching move alone to me is like an indication of, no, like it's unacceptable to be this bad this long. We got to kind of move forward. I think one of the interesting things is what happens if they're stuck in the middle. And what I mean by that is, like, the Nets, I think, are going to win like 16 games. And I like a lot of their players. Like, I like Nick Claxton and I like a lot of their guys, but they're going to win 16 games. Like, they have to take, this is the one for them. So they have to be absolutely terrible. And if you're Portland and you're looking at Brooklyn and you're like, we need to make sure that there's no chance we fall out of top 4, then they've got to be closer to 20, sub 20, and these types of things as well. And then, some of the other teams, I think they're in that category, are going to be in that range. So I think what's going to be interesting is if they can't catch top 4, if it's like, well, okay, we're on pace for like, we're not going to make the playoffs. We're on pace for like 29 wins. Like, do they pivot to get as high as possible? Or is there a chance that they kind of go the other direction and are like, look, let's try and, because some teams do this, like the Wolves did this, and like a bunch of teams have done this, where at the end they're like, screw the lottery. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do this. I think it depends on where you're at. But sometimes teams do get to the end and are like, screw it, let's try and build good habits instead of focusing in on getting the 5th spot versus the 7th or whatever. And it's impossible to kind of predict where those teams are going to be. But just from like a general sense, you do kind of feel like they are not going to completely give up on like, hey, we need to actually change some culture stuff here too, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think when you have a new president in Trajan Langdon, and there's a lot to figure out about him, obviously being a first-time president, but you're coming into a situation where this team has just been flat bad. And you mentioned that they brought in Tobias Harris, they paid him. You bring in Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., you resign Simone Fontecchio. These are guys that can help you win right now. Those aren't guys you bring in if you're not trying to win and establish good habits and move forward. I think along with that, you have to consider that the Pistons were the worst team last year. They fell down to 5. They had the worst team the year before that. The Wemby's sweepstakes fell down to 5. And they also had the 5th pick the year before that with Jaden Ivey. So, maybe this is a team where you just don't pay attention to the odds at all, right? Like if you're being the worst, you're still falling down to 5. At a certain point, you might as well just try to win. So I'm curious to see where they are in February. If you can, like, let's say best case scenario, you could crack 35, 36 wins this season. In the long run, that's probably more meaningful than just having a chance at another generational player when you've already fallen the maximum amount of spots the last 2 years. So there's a lot to figure out just with it being a new regime. But my sense is that they want to establish good habits and they want to turn the page and begin to put a real team on the floor.
Yeah, at some point, I think you got to accept, like, the gods hate you. Just get over it
Yeah.
and try to make the best that you got. I want to ask you this because I am really curious on it. I thought the JB hire was really good once I kind of looked at it and thought about what JB's done with the Cavaliers and what he's done in his career and where he's at and the kind of coach that he is. He's a hard coach to peg because I do think that he had troubles in the playoffs, but I'm also like, guess what? Detroit doesn't have to worry about that for at least like a season or two. Mm-hmm. What do you think made the JB hire for them? Like the Monty decision, I think is separate, but like the decision to actually have that JB was the guy because there were, Atkinson and there was like a bunch of other a bunch of guys were in consideration for the gig. What was it that made JB the hire for Detroit?
I think they really, for one, you look at what he did in Cleveland, where you have a young team with Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, and eventually you add another big piece and Donovan Mitchell to make that leap forward. But that happened before they got Donovan. We saw Darius Garland become an all-star. We've seen Mobley improve on both ends every single year. Isaac Okoro really got better. So just the development aspect and the recency of it. You can even go back to Memphis. Like I covered him when he was in Memphis with the Grizzlies, and they were one of the top defensive teams all season, even as they traded Marc Gasol and kind of remade their roster before moving on from Mike Conley that next summer. But you look at just the recent track record, what he's done with the young bigs. He had Jaren Jackson Jr. in Memphis, and now you have Jalen Duren. Isaiah Stewart got paid last summer, and he's been a really good rotation piece for him. And also, I just think timeline-wise, it was just easiest for them to go with a coach who could come in and has been through it, knows how to build a staff, knows what program building is like. They operated on a really compressed timeline this summer because Trajan was hired like at the beginning of June, end of May. The Troy Weaver decision was pretty straightforward. He ended up going down to Washington, but it took them a few weeks to work out what they were going to do with Monty, right? Do we bring him back another year? Obviously, I know a lot of listeners know he signed that historic deal last summer. It was the most money in not franchise history, but I think North American sports history before Spoelstra and Pop and a couple other guys got paid more. But you still have that money that Tom Gorge is paying. So do we just give up on it now? Do we pull the plug or do we move forward? And the thing is, it took them a few weeks to figure that out. They met with Monty. They had discussions, this and that. And in the end, they decided we need to move on. But now you fired your coach like 2 weeks before the draft, right? So they had Sean Sweeney, Kenny Atkinson, like you mentioned, they had some guys come in, some new guys, some older faces. And I think JB just had the right combination of everything they wanted in a head coach at this moment.
Yeah, one of the things I thought was impressive is when they first hired Trajan, it kind of sounded like a little bit of like, okay, another person in this conversation, like this is going to be like messy and awkward. Like I was like, oh God, this is going to be a Hawks all over again because the Hawks have so many chefs in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, no, like Trajan's it's just Trajan. Like they just gave Trajan the wheel. It's probably too early for this. And so if the answer for this is like, nope, haven't been able to, like, that's going to be a training camp question. Totally reasonable. But is there anything from JB's introductory press conference that you've gotten from talking to anybody in the organization in terms of that they're going to take like anything from a basketball perspective of how they're going to approach things under JB that may be different from how they were with Monty last year?
I think a lot of that is training camp. Trajan, he came in and he was honest, right? Like I was in New Orleans all last season, and there's still a lot he has to learn about these guys, this roster, how they fit. So I expect at least the first half of next season, a lot of that will just be evaluation, figuring out where guys are. You have two guys in Ivey and Jalen Duran, who will be extension eligible next summer. And I think there's just a lot of data that they have to gather on that. But I will say one frustration I know for a lot of Pistons fans last season is that they didn't really stagger Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, and J.I., I'm not sure what was going on with him and Monty, but his role just fluctuated a lot over the course of the year. And he didn't really begin staggering them until maybe the last 35-ish games of the year. But that's one thing JB mentioned. He was asked about Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, how they were staggered in Cleveland, and if there's any parallels. And obviously Cade and Ivey have to prove that they're on that level. But it does appear that JB is viewing Ivey as more of an on-ball guard, a guy who can run the offense when Cade sits. They don't have a quote-unquote real backup point guard on this roster. Outside of Cade, you just have Ivey and then Marcus Sasser, who was a rookie last year, who can really, make plays with the ball in their hands. So I would expect Ivey to have a different role than last season. They need to know, especially if he can be that other lead guard next to Cade before you're due to pay him in a year. And that's one thing I'll be watching this season. How does Ivey fare in those minutes without Cade, and what extent do they trust him with the ball? And obviously, can he grow in that role as well?
Yeah, any more structure with lineups, rotations, and just like the overall structure is good because, man, I went through 2,000 Pistons possessions, and there was just
that's a lot of possessions. That's a lot of Pistons basketball to watch.
There was just a lot of like it was surprising to me just because like I think Monty is a good coach. Like I've said this, like I think Monty is a good coach and he was the wrong guy at this time. And it's why like when a guy tells you no, you should listen. Like the first time the guy tells you no, you should probably be like, cool, and not be like, okay, but what if I offered you all of the money in all of the world? Then would you do it? That's not the way to go about it. Because just like so many of the possessions to me felt like I've watched these teams where it's like they're just out there filling minutes and trying shit with no real direction or purpose. And I'm like, you're not going to build anything that way. Like just telling Cade, like, well, try and get past this guy and make a play. No, man, like give the guy like a little bit of structure. And that's why like I'm excited about this because I think Harris and Beasley help from a personnel standpoint of that. But I'm also excited because I think JB will actually be like, all right, what can we actually do here and build on this? You mentioned Ivey, and the staggering question I think is a big part of that. But I do think like, do you think the team is at with them? Are they very much like, hey, like you were highly touted? Because there was a lot of folks that felt that he was like the best prospect coming out of that draft. Like there was a lot of folks I talked to. They're like, yeah, I've got Ivey 1. And like last year, what really stood out to me is like the finishing was really rough. Like he or Cade are going to have to make some layups. Like somebody's going to have to make some layups at the rim in order for this thing to function. Is this kind of a make it break it year for him? Is this a we still believe in him and we just need to get him in the right situation? Where do you think the organization is at with Ivey?
I don't think it's make or break yet, especially when we have a new regime that's getting to know him for the first time. But with that, you do have a compressed timeline just because he's going into year 3 and year 4, right? So if you're not extending him next summer, now essentially you're in more of a make or break situation a year from now where, okay, are we going to commit to him long term or is he a guy that we could build around? So with J.I., I think last season was just a season where you didn't get the info and the data that you needed on him. You mentioned the layups. He didn't shoot the ball that well. He started off pretty well and it kind of tailed off as the year went on. He's got some strides to make as a playmaker. He can make certain reads, but he hasn't quite been like that primary point guard type yet, more of a combo guard. So a lot of it is internally with him. How much can he improve his game, right? Because Cade Cunningham is there. Cade Cunningham is the guy. And the reality is that they're going to have to build a team that fits around Cade. You can't build around Ivey at this point. So Ivey's going to have to do some things he's not comfortable with as far as being a shooter, as far as picking up certain defensive assignments. And I think we'll see him in a lot of different looks next season as they figure out exactly how to utilize this guy. But you also mentioned the shooting with Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway and those guys. And if there's one player on the team who could really benefit from a wider floor, it's Ivey because of that speed, because of his ability to get downhill, that first step. He's somebody that could really put immense pressure on the defense. And they don't really have another on-ball guy on their roster with that type of speed. Like I would say most teams don't. So that's a very unique weapon that they're going to try to figure out how to utilize. But there's a bit of a push and pull, right? They want Ivey to be a core guy, but Ivey's got to do his part too. And then you also have to put the right structure on the floor for him to succeed. So I just really think the first 40, 50 games next season will tell us a lot about where certain guys are, and that'll dictate their process through the trade deadline and the next offseason as well.
Last one for you. So you mentioned Cade. As a Cade believer, last year was really great because after they went through, the worst stretch of any team in NBA history, he finally started to kind of turn the corner, and the shot came around. Finishing was still an issue for him, but obviously he's a great playmaker. I love his defensive upside. Like, I'm now like all the way back in on Cade as like centerpiece of the organization. With actual NBA players around him, which I think will help, and more structure, and with the upside of what this team kind of presents. How far up do you think Cade can get to? Like, are there still things that you think are going to be holding him back this year to a significant degree? Or does this kind of look to you like the year where it's like, nah, like this should be the year where he really pops, because he had that injury in year 2 and like all these different types of things. So to me, this looks like an opportunity. It's going to be hard for him because I can't put the Pistons at like 40 plus wins. And then so it's going to be hard for him to get awards recognition in any sort of serious way. But I do kind of wonder if we're going to be sitting there going like, hey, I don't know, it's Christmas. Should Cade Cunningham be an all-star, even though the Pistons are, whatever they are at that point? If they can get off to a good start, I think that'll change kind of the conversation. They need like an outlier burst of wins in there. But I'm just kind of curious as to what you see is like where Cade's going to be in how we view these guys by the end of the season.
I think Cade will be more in the conversation as an all-star. You look at his numbers last season where he averaged 23 points, almost 8 assists, shot 45% overall, 36% from 3. It was a pretty solid overall season, but with that, he also got better as the year went on, where through the first 15, 20 games or so, he led the NBA in turnovers, and then he really cut down on that. He started the season off pretty inefficient, and over his last 18 games, he shot almost 40% from 3, like 88, 89% at the line. Overall efficiency went way up. He got better as the year went on. He mentioned that shin injury he had his sophomore year. It was clear he had to play his way back into form last season. And you compare his numbers to other All-Stars, and he was right there. His numbers are right there with Paolo Banchero. Obviously Banchero is a little bit of a better rebounder and Cade's the better passer. But he's putting up numbers that would get a lot of players in the All-Star conversation if their team also did their part and had the amount of wins that they need, of course. So you look at this Pistons team, I don't know if they're going to win enough games for Cade to really be at the forefront of that discussion. But you take last season's stats with an upgraded roster, and to me, that looks like a guy that could really have that type of breakout season. So a lot of it just depends on how the pieces mesh and how will the Pistons start off. I mean, if they lose, last year they lost like 27 of their first 29 or something. Like, yeah, I mean, that crushed any chance of Cade making the All-Star game, of course. But this upcoming season, I think things will line up for him a bit more favorably. And assuming that he continues that trajectory he had last season where his efficiency improved, his passing improved as the year went on, it should be a breakout season for him. So I'm very curious to see how that looks for him.
All right, that's awesome stuff from Omari Sankofa of the Detroit Free Press. You can catch him on Twitter at Omari Sankofa. Omari, thanks so much for joining me.
Matt, thank you so much for having me.